Thank you, gentlemen. The gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Estes.
Well, thank you, Chairman, Acting Chairman, or Chairman, and thank you to the panelists for being here today. It's important that we talk through this issue. Just as we saw with the previous panel, the Treasury Department's willfully ignoring the reality by working around Congress, working around the committee, and trying to pave the way for new taxes to these deals with the OECD that are fundamentally un-American and would give away our tax base to foreign countries. Throughout the process of the OECD base erosion and profit shifting, the BEPS 2.0 negotiation, administration has repeatedly made commitments that are out of its prerogative to both make and fulfill. Treasury has cut Congress out of the process, even though constitutionally only Congress can write tax laws and commit the United States to the end deal negotiated at OECD. And why is the administration repeatedly ignoring the requests of the committee and dumbing down on the efforts to give away American tax base? It's all to ram down this bad anti-American policy. At virtually every step of the negotiation process, the administration's chosen America last. The deal's so terrible, I have to ask which country's interests the Biden administration negotiated for, because it doesn't seem to be the interest of America that the Treasury's negotiated for. As a result of Pillar 2, if we followed UTPR, the U.S. Treasury would get less tax revenue, U.S. businesses will pay more in taxes, U.S. businesses will have more administrative cost and work effort to increase. U.S. taxpayers will not have credit for the current tax code provisions that they have to comply with. And it incentivizes businesses, whether they're located in U.S. or businesses located in other tax countries, to look for the lowest tax district because they will not have to pay the global minimum in addition to what they're already paying. And we've already put the big effort in getting away from inversions with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that we passed 5 years ago. The concessions during the Pillar 2 negotiations will result in U.S. companies paying more tax overall, but less to the United States. As the Joint Committee Taxation identified, the U.S. will lose roughly $120 billion in tax revenue if Pillar 2 is adopted globally, but we don't change our tax code, and we'll still lose $60 billion if we do adopt the OECD Pillar 2. And furthermore, our share of global gross domestic product is 24%, while U.S. countries' share is 40% of the income exposed to the higher taxes. Further evidence that the deal disappropriately affects the United States. Ms. Hertzfield, can you explain how such a scheme would benefit the United States? I mean, are there anything in the deal that benefits us in exchange for what we're giving away?
Thank you. I personally have trouble seeing the benefit, and I'm often asked the question from people from other countries why the U.S. negotiated this deal.
You know, this week, OECD announced delays in implementation of one of the Pillar 2's most harmful provisions, one that I think is really the problem, the under-taxed profits rule. But this delay is not a fundamental change in this bad policy and only extends this uncertainty companies are facing. Ms. Gordon, what are the main concerns you hear from companies about complying with these new rules? What's the response you're hearing about the delay in implementation?
Congressman, thank you for your question. So our members welcome the delay, but as you mentioned, it's not a change in policy. And some of the concerns are, even with the UTPR safe harbor, that only applies to the United States. So most multinationals have entities in other countries as well. And if they are in Ireland, where there's a lot of U.S. investment, the UTPR safe harbor will not count on that income in Ireland, for instance.
So it's problematic. I mean, and from my point of view, is if it's a bad policy, it's a bad policy next year. It's a bad policy 2 years later. It's just a bad policy, and that's not what we should implement. I'm really concerned about this policy. I'm really concerned about UTPR. I mean, as JCT confirmed, that the United States will lose less if we're forced to implement the OECD Pillar 2 provisions. It's not that we're going to gain more. And the fact that UTPR and Pillar 2 is not really a volunteer tax sovereignty. I mean, if you want to consider extortionary threats of you either change your tax code or you pay this higher rate anyway, So for that provisions, I'm really concerned about this process. Really, we need to fix the bad policy before it gets implemented ever. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.